Hey everyone, welcome to SFDC Stop, and in this video we are going to learn about batch class or batch apex in Salesforce. What is a batch class? A batch class or batch apex is used to run large jobs when we are dealing with thousands or millions of records and we can easily hit the governor limits. So you must be aware of some governor limits. For example, if you want to query the records, then you can query at max 50,000 records in a single transaction, right? Similarly, if you want to update the records, then you can perform a DML on at max 10,000 records in the same transaction, right? So these are the governor limits that we can overcome using batch apex. A typical use case for batch apex can be data cleaning or archiving operation. Let's say you want to archive all the records in your Salesforce org who are 5 years old. So let's say you want to archive all the accounts in your Salesforce org which are 5 years older. In that case, you can have a batch class which is running on a daily basis, and that batch class will automatically query the records which are 5 years older, and it is going to send those records to an external system and then delete them later. What Salesforce is going to do in case of a batch class is that it is going to query all the records at once. So for example, let's say you want to update 1 million records. So Salesforce is going to query all those 1 million records at once, and then it is going to process those records in a batch of 200 records. Okay, so the default batch size for a batch class is 200 records. The maximum batch size that you can set in case of a batch class is 2000 records in a single batch. Now let's consider a requirement and let's see how we can solve that particular use case using batch class. So our requirement is create a batch class to opt out contact records from email, call, and fax whose unsubscribe date has passed. So what we have here, we have a lot of contact records in Salesforce, and each contact record is having an unsubscribe date. So if you see, this is the contact object, and I have a date field here named as unsubscribe date. Whenever a contact is receiving a call or a marketing email, that contact has an option to unsubscribe. Okay, and whenever the contact is unsubscribing for the marketing communication, this unsubscribe date is automatically populated. So let's say we need to run this batch on a daily basis, and this batch is going to check all the contacts whose unsubscribe date has already passed, and it is going to opt out those contacts from email, call, and fax as well. So in case a contact has unsubscribed, it should be opted out from all the communications. Now let's see how we can create a batch class. So if you see, we have a class here named as UpdateContactsBatch, and this class is going to update all the contacts who have opted out of email, fax, and phone communications. So let me just add call here as well, email, call, and fax. In order to convert this class into a batch class, this class is going to implement an interface, and that interface is known as database.batchable interface. And here we have to specify a type. So let's say the type is subject because I'm dealing with subjects here, right? What I'm going to do, let me just save this class first and let's see what are the errors that we get. Because we have implemented an interface, that means we have to implement some methods as well, which are defined in the interface. So as you can see, it is specifying us that we need to implement 3 methods. One is the start method, second is the finish method, and third is the execute method. Okay, typically it is the start method and then the execute and then the finish method. These are the 3 methods that we need to implement. So let's see one by one how we can implement these. The first method that we need to implement is the start method. So let's implement that. So I'm going to do public database.query locator start, and this start method is going to accept an instance of database.batchable context. So I'm just going to pass in an instance of database.batchable context, and the name is batchable context. Okay. What the start method is going to do, it is going to query the records and it is going to return us the instance of database.queryLocator. So I'm just going to do return database.getQueryLocator. So we have a method named as getQueryLocator in the database class, which is going to return me the instance of a database.queryLocator by specifying the sockle query. So I can specify a sockle query in this parameter and it will automatically return me the instance of the QueryLocator class. So in our case, we need to query contacts. So I'm going to do select ID from contact, where I want to query all those contacts whose unsubscribe date is passed, right? So I want to query all the contacts whose unsubscribe date is less than today. All those contacts who have unsubscribed in the past, I'm going to query those contacts and I'm going to return the instance of database.queryLocator. So QueryLocator is nothing but a class which is predefined by Salesforce under the database namespace. Similarly, we have a batchable context interface as well, and this interface is defined by Salesforce, which is present under the database namespace. So what we are going to do, we are going to query all the records, or I can say all the contact records, whose unsubscribe date is less than the today, and I'm going to return these records. So we have our start method defined. Now let's define the execute method. In order to define execute method, what I'm going to do, I'm simply going to say public void execute, and this execute method is going to accept two parameters. One is the instance of database.batchable context, and second one is a list of subject. Let me add these things. So let's say we have an instance of database.batchable context. I'm going to name it as batchable context, and we are also going to have a list of subjects. So I'm going to name it as contacts, okay, because I'm going to have a list of contacts. So all the contacts that I'm querying from the start method, they are going to be passed into the execute method automatically. Now I have a list of contacts. What I need to do, I need to update these contacts. In order to update these contacts, I'm going to use a for loop. So let's say for each S object, because it is of type S object, right? So for each S object contact in contacts, what I'm going to do, I'm going to opt out these contacts from email, fax, and call. So I can simply say contact dot put do not call true. So there is a field on the contact named as do not call, and I'm also going to say has opted out of email as true. So I can say that contact dot put has opted out of email as true, and contact dot put has opted out of fax as true. And finally, I'm going to update all these contacts. That's it. And the third method that I need to implement is the finish method. So for that, I can simply do public void finish, and it is going to receive an instance of database.batchable context again. So if you see, all the three methods are receiving this instance. It is also going to receive instance of database.batchable context. And we can do some final things here. The finish method is basically used to notify the user that the batch is complete. So this is the typical use case of finish method, so that you can notify the user once the batch is complete, because running a batch is an asynchronous process which may take a lot of time. So once your batch is complete, you can send an email from the finish method to the user saying that, hey, the batch is complete and proceeded successfully. In some cases, you can also call another batch from the finish method of the first batch. So let's say you want to update all the accounts first, and once all the accounts are updated, you want to update all the contacts. So in that case, you can call the contacts batch from the finish method of the accounts batch, so that you can chain them together. So we can say that the finish method is used to execute a final operation once the batch is complete, right? So as of now, I'm not going to add anything to my finish method because I don't want to send an email or something like that. I just want my batch like this. So let me just save this and let's see what happens. So if you see, our batch class is saved successfully. And just to mention one more point, you can also return an instance of iterable instead of database.queryLocator from the start method, but we'll see that in the next video. For now, you need to know that in case I'm using database.queryLocator, I can return a maximum of 50 million records, okay, which is a big limit, I think. So at max, a batch can process 50 million records, and it can return 50 million records from our database.queryLocator. Now let's see how many contacts we have in our Salesforce org, and we are going to update all those contacts whose unsubscribe date is less than today. So what I'm going to do, I'm first of all going to find out all the contacts who have opted out of email as false, opted out of fax as false, and do not call as false as well, because I'm going to update all these C fields to true. So I want to find out all the contacts who have these C fields as false as of now. Let me just execute this SOQL query quickly. And if you see, I have about 20,000 contacts in my Salesforce org who are having these things as false. That means they have subscribed. Out of these 20,000 contacts, I want to find out the contacts whose unsubscribe date is greater than today, right? Because if the unsubscribe date is in future, then that means the contact has not unsubscribed yet, right? And we don't want to process those contacts. So I just want to know the count once. And I also want to know the count of contacts whose unsubscribe date is null. So let me just execute this query. And if you see, this count is 0. This simply means that all the contacts that are present in my Salesforce org, that means all these 20,000 contacts, has the unsubscribe date less than today, okay? And it is not equal to null as well. So this means that our batch is going to process 20,000 contacts, because if you see the total number of contacts as well, So let me just show you the total number of contacts in my Salesforce org as well. It is going to be 20,000. Okay, so I have a 20,000 contacts in my Salesforce org in total, and all those contacts has opted out of email, fax and phone, but they are not updated yet because all those contacts have unsubscribe date as less than today and not greater than today because this was coming as 0, right? Now let's execute this batch and let's update all the contacts with these fields as true. Okay. In order to execute a batch, you need to call database.executeBatch method, and inside this method, you can pass an instance of your batch class. So if you see, I'm passing an instance of my UpdateContactsBatch class here, and as a second parameter, I can also specify the batch size. So let's say instead of having a batch size of 200 records, I want to have a batch size of 2000 records. So I can specify that as well. If I want to have a batch size of 20 records, I can specify that as well. Okay. So this second parameter is optional. Although if you don't specify the second parameter, then by default, the batch size will be 200 records. So if you see, I have 20,000 records in total. So I have 20,000 records in total. And by default, the batch size is 200 records. So if I ask you that how many batches will be there, okay, so the total number of batches will be 20,000 divided by 200. That means I'm going to have 100 batches in total, right? Okay, so let me just execute this batch and let's see what happens. In order to monitor your batch, what you can do, you can just go to setup and search for Apex jobs, and you can click on this link. It will take you to the Apex jobs page where you can monitor the progress of your batch. So I'm just going to execute this batch and let's see what happens. So let's execute this code, and this is executed successfully. And if you see, I refresh this page and here is our batch Apex which is running. So it is in the status as processing, and the total number of batches are 100. And as of now, the total batches processed are 2 and there is 0 failure. Okay. So what Salesforce is doing currently, it has queried 20,000 contacts, and out of those 20,000 contacts, it has prepared 100 batches, and each batch is going to process 200 contacts at a time. So it has processed 50 batches as of now. Let me just refresh this page once again. So if you see, my batch Apex job is completed now, and I have processed all 100 batches out of total 100 batches, and the failures are 0. So this means that my update contacts batch is now complete. And if I go back here and let me just do the circle query once again. If you remember earlier when I executed this query, I was having 20,000 as a result, right? So let me just execute this query once again. So if you see, now the count of contacts is 0. This means that for all the 20,000 contacts which were having has opted out of email as false, has opted out of fax as false, and do not call as false, these 3 fields have shifted to true, because if you see, our batch is updating all these 3 fields as true. Okay. So all the contacts are now having these fields as true. I can show that to you as well. So let me just copy this query once. And if I show it to you here, instead of false, I can just make it true because our batch has updated all the contacts. And let me execute this query. So if you see, I'm having 20,000 contacts which are having has opted out of email as true, has opted out of fax as true, and do not call as true as well. Okay. Therefore, I can say that our batch has ran successfully now and it has updated all the contacts, right? So this is how you can create a very simple batch class in order to perform data cleaning or in order to update the contacts or any kind of records in bulk. So that's all for this tutorial, everyone. I hope you liked it. Let me know your feedback in the comments down below. I hope you understood that how we can create a very simple batch class and how we can overcome the governor limits by processing the records in batches. In the next tutorial, we are going to have a deep dive in the execute batch method of the database class, where we'll learn how it is using the instance of our batch class in order to process all the records in batches, and we'll also learn about the significance of this batchable context instance which we are getting in each and every method of the batch class. So I'll see you next time. Till then, have a good day. Bye bye.